A very good evening and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Board, the second on Monday the 11th of November at 5 p.m. here in the Council Chamber offices in Christchurch. The first meeting that we've had today was around the issue call for evidence of 5G connectivity. The second meeting that we're in now is much more business as usual and we'll be looking predominantly at the Cabinet-related reports for the forthcoming Cabinet. So a very warm welcome to board members, other councillors, officers and members of the public, and I will pass over to Democratic Services for some housekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'll just read out a brief housekeeping notice. Please note that this Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when speaking. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm goes off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble in front of the building by the public toilets. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. First item on the agenda are apologies. And apologies have been received from Councillors Mike Brooke, Millie Earle and Chris Rigby. Second item is substitute members. We have received notification from the appropriate group leaders or their nominated representatives that Councillor Richard Burton will be substituting for Mike Brooke, Councillor Tony Trent is substituting for Councillor Millie Earle, and Councillor Lisa Northover is substituting for Councillor Chris Rigby. Third item of business, declarations of interest. Do any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests for this meeting?
Councillors Green.
I don't believe that this is a disclosable pecuniary interest, but for purposes of transparency in relation to it's item 5 on the Cabinet agenda. Probably, I'm not quite sure what it is on this one, but in line with the declaration that I've made on my register of interest, I have an interest in property in areas which may be affected.
Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have an identical declaration, which is purely for transparency. We do own rented property within BCP, and there is likely to be a discussion about the relationship between homelessness and what is being done in the various sectors.
Thank you. Any further declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. Again, for transparency purposes, I am an owner of several rented properties, and I own a couple of companies that are involved in housing. Thank you. They're already declared on my usual council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Burton. Sorry, if you just use the...
Likewise, I own some rental properties within BCP, also declared on my forms.
Thank you very much. Any further declarations of interest? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item 4, minutes. We have the minutes from the meetings held on the 23rd of September and the 4th of October for confirmation and signing.
Members, any comments or amendments to the minutes as read? Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, on page 19, in the minutes of the 4th of October meeting, when we were discussing the Transforming Cities Fund, the leader of the council, as it said, she explained that there were various difficulties engaging with the local MPs at this time, some of which previous administrations may not have faced. There has been some communication since then between a number of members, and I hope that the board will ask that so that we are absolutely certain about what happened, because there seems to be some discrepancies, that those involved in the council who have been asked for some details are that they should be urged to respond as soon as possible to give those details.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other further comments around the minutes? Okay. Yep. In which case we'll note that and hopefully that will take place.
Public speaking. We haven't received a notification of any public questions, statements or petitions for this meeting, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. In which case we will move directly on to item 6, which deals with the scrutiny of the housing-related Cabinet reports, which are being considered by Cabinet on the 13th of November. In particular, the first, which is around the homelessness and rough sleeping action plan. And I'd like to, as has become our pattern now, ask Councillor Wilson to introduce the item. Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson.
Okay, welcome board. I hope you're not too tired. After 3 hours of 5G, I was watching on the big screen. Looked very enticing. So I'm going to just kind of introduce this. Hopefully I won't take up too much time. So the report is about the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Plan. The Homelessness Reduction Act in 2017, implemented in April 2018, was the single biggest change in homelessness law in 40 years. The Act introduced a number of changes. It strengthened a duty for councils to provide advisory services, an extension for the period during which an applicant is considered threatened with homelessness from 28 days to 56 days, new duties for the councils to assess all applicants and to take reasonable steps to prevent and relieve homelessness. These steps are set out in a personalised housing plan that, wherever possible, must be agreed between the local authority and the recipient. Further to the HRA, 2018 saw the launch of the National Rough Sleeping Strategy. This details the government's aims to help people who are sleeping rough now and put in place structures to end rough sleeping for good, specifically halving rough sleeping by 2022 and eradicating rough sleeping by 2027. During the first, so I'm going to go on to the local context now. During the first year of the new homelessness duties, the preceding councils for the PCP area assessed over 2,700 households who were either homeless or threatened with homelessness. Significant numbers of households were assisted and supported in a range of ways and often part of a wider multi-agency support to remain in their homes or to find quick alternatives. Over 1,100 households, often including vulnerable adults and families, were supported in this way. Where prevention efforts were not successful, the council may be required to provide temporary accommodation. 261 homes are used for this purpose across the conurbation. The council does not have, however, a sufficient supply of suitable temporary homes to meet demand. Bed and breakfast accommodation is regularly used. The use of B&B has slightly decreased over the last year. At the end of September 2019, 73 households were living in B&B. The significant majority being single people rather than families. The new action plan recognises the continued need to reduce the B&B and provide alternative quality temporary housing. The number of rough sleepers across the BCP area, and in Bournemouth specifically, remains relatively high. Like many areas, the number of rough sleepers, or those having street lifestyles, has unfortunately increased over recent years. There also remains a significant demand from households who are often living in precarious housing circumstances, often referred to as hidden homeless, moving frequently from one temporary housing arrangement to another, where seeking settled housing, retaining employment or education, or maintaining individual health and well-being is a daily challenge. The Council is responsible for working together to ensure it meets the housing and support needs of homeless 16 and 17-year-olds and provides young people leaving care with somewhere safe and suitable to live, to help them transition into positive adulthood. It is essential, therefore, that the approach taken recognises where to prioritise activity which adequately provides young people with the right accommodation and support options, including preparation and planning for the reality of local housing provision. Where housing crisis or emergencies occur, that the right housing and support is immediately available to young people, and accessible long-term settled housing is available, which best suits the individual's needs. The future housing and homelessness strategy will ensure key links are made with the Council's corporate parenting responsibilities. There has also been the introduction of a new BCP homelessness partnership, which represents a key opportunity to strengthen the efforts to reduce the need for people to rough sleep in our towns. The new partnership, launched on World Homelessness Day, 10th of October 2019, brings together local, voluntary and statutory organisations to join up local efforts and projects, all working together to avoid duplication and ensuring a common targeted approach to addressing homelessness is in place across the conurbation. The role of the voluntary sector is key in assisting in the prevention of homelessness, and the launch of the new homelessness partnership will be help ensure all partners are working together to achieve the best outcomes. So in 2020, the project plan, we're developing a timeline for the new BCP homelessness strategy, and the expectation that the strategy will be recommended to Cabinet for 2020 for approval. However, we do have until the 31st of March 2021, but we'll be keen to bring this forward to 2020. The action plans supporting each existing strategy have been aligned into one, with key themes of the preceding strategy action plan summarised across the 6 following objectives. So these are the objectives that we wish to see in the action plan. Preventing homelessness and minimising the use of temporary accommodation. Reducing homelessness and rough sleeping to as close as 0 as possible, and I think this should always be our goal, to try and aim for 0. Developing a range of sustainable housing options and pathways. Developing partnership work and wider communications to ensure efficient and effective use of resources. Key improvements to health and wellbeing and awareness. Update key partnerships, policies, processes and protocols following LGR. I'm just going to quickly mention a couple of the achievements that have happened. Statutory data and returns benchmark indicate that BCP actually performs well in comparison to both regional and national averages in homelessness prevention activity. Where services working together prevent homelessness, a positive outcome is achieved for 79% of those requesting assistance, compared to 71% in the South West and 66% nationally. So in terms of the national picture, we're doing actually quite well in preventing, in our preventative actions, but there's always more that we can be doing. A number of effective local partnerships have been and are being developed to improve the timeliness of early help interventions where support and advice are delivered collaboratively. There remains significant challenges in identifying suitable accommodation alternatives for those who become homeless, particularly for those with complex needs, and that's something that we really need to assess in the future. Despite the high demand, there have been a range of successes and achievements across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole in the preceding years of the representative strategies. Some of these examples include a commissioned rough sleeper outreach service coordinating severe weather emergency provision, continued targeted advice and support, successful bid and mobilised staffing to provide enhanced services for rough sleepers, provision of rough sleeper initiative grant, launch of street support website, continued safe sleep provision, and much collaborative work across the faith and voluntary sector, private rented access schemes supporting local landlords and tenants, the recommissioning of Housing First services, providing accommodation and support to those with the most complex needs, and work underway to consolidate and ideally upscale an approach for BCP. An improved, as I touched upon earlier in the report, an improved homelessness and accommodation pathway introduced for 16 to 17-year-olds. Housing option services presented with a Bronze Silver Standard Awards recognition in the quality and comprehensive approach to homelessness prevention activities. I think just to summarise, no one is predestined to become homeless. Everybody deserves a stable and safe, secure home. However, many households in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole still face the harmful consequences of becoming homeless. Homelessness, including rough sleeping, is extremely complex. Addressing the challenges can only develop effectively through the collaboration of council services with local communities, businesses, charities, and other statutory and non-statutory partners. So, it's a team effort to prevent homelessness and rough sleeping. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson, for reading the report. Could I ask the board for any comments or questions that they may have? I'll start with it's certainly very welcome to have this in front of us. It's one of the most important items that we have to do as councillors, and it does seem really apt to try and bring all this together, and I'd certainly welcome the report. Councillor Trent.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of coverage on TV and so on about some of the unsuitable accommodation that children, 16, 17-year-olds and younger, are being put in. And I've witnessed over the last few years, when I've been doing other work, some of the atrocious and unsafe accommodation that we could be pointing families towards. What safeguards are there in place to make sure that any property we're putting people in, temporarily or less temporarily, are up to a reasonable standard? And do we actually have the ability of withholding funding in terms of allowances and so on from some of the landlords that do provide atrocious accommodation in the area?
Thank you, Councillor Trent. I'll direct that to the Cabinet members. There's probably two parts to that. First of all, I suppose, how do we assure that the probably the council-owned property that we're putting people in that are at risk of homelessness into, how do we ensure that those standards are correct? But perhaps a separate issue around the private landlords, for instance. So, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, so the first part was about the temporary accommodation that with hotels and things. Was that? Yeah. So I think that there is a list of authorised agencies and people that we can use. However, some of them, and I must admit this, meet standards, whereas I would like to actually do a review of these kinds of things and actually see that we're putting people in potentially better temporary accommodation, or actually getting rid of temporary accommodation altogether. I think these are long-term goals, and I don't think they'll happen overnight. But I think that we need to be looking at the quality that we are putting people in, because, vulnerable people are going into these temporary accommodations. I mean, if you're going into temporary accommodation, you haven't got there, you're in there for a reason. It's an emergency kind of thing. And we need to be looking at the kind of quality we are putting people in. So although, and I've been to a few places, and they're up to standard, but if you have someone who, has gone through some trauma, going into these places, although they're up to standard, they're not necessarily the best places for them to be going. And I think that we do have to review that. So that's, I suppose, we have a list. We do try and match people up as best as possible, but I do think that there is some work to be done around that in going forward. And in terms of the private,
before we move on to that one, it's a very good and noble aspiration. I wonder whether you could draw out some examples of the type of temporary accommodation we're currently putting people into that you're not happy with and you'd like to.
It's not that I'm not happy with it. It's just that I think that there's stuff that meets requirements, and but I feel that we should be going beyond meeting requirements for our residents. And I think, like you said, it's an aspiration. It's something that we have to achieve over the course of a period of time, and it's not going to happen overnight. But and I wouldn't particularly like to name names. I think that's something that has to be done going forward as part of the process. But I think that, it's definitely something that we need to review, and it's something that I'm aware of.
The second question, sorry, I interrupted. So
yeah. So the second question was
just around Councillor Trent. The second question was around assuring that the people aren't forced into a position by, or has it been answered?
I think it was about penalties for those that
penalties. If it's been answered.
Yeah, I think it's been answered. It's just really looking at what is done to ensure that we don't actually put people into appalling accommodation, because some of the accommodation I've come across that usually private rent that we might guide people towards because we can't house them ourselves, I see as positively dangerous. I came across one when I was doing a door-to-door sort of market research job, and I thought, my God, that is so atrocious that, it was dangerous. And that was owned by a very well-known local landlord.
Mr. Wilson, wish to respond? Or?
You were saying sorry, I didn't catch the last part of it. So you were saying that you'd gone on a door-to-door and you'd seen some stuff that had been atrocious.
Yeah, there is some quite appalling stuff there, and I'm sure that it's one of those people that we've guided people that we can't house ourselves towards living in, and
I'd be happy.
I am fearful of what sort of accommodation is getting through the net that, we are
Well,
putting people in indirectly or directly.
Yeah. I'd be really keen to take the details off you outside the meeting, and we can have a look into it. That'd be all right.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of quick questions and one slightly longer. But before I do, and apologies for this, but I do think it's a little bit disrespectful for the Cabinet member to come in and to read large chunks of the report. I'm sure that other board members, like me, will have made sure that we've read the report beforehand, and when we hear a report, when we look for a report to be introduced, we're not looking for a repetition of exactly the words that we have read. We're looking for an introduction to what's going on and maybe some stuff around it. But that is the point. Another very quick point that I'd make is just on the appendix. Before I ask the questions, we have the objectives, the priorities, the levels, the actions, the target dates, the resources, and the updates. But it looks to me as though the target dates don't seem to correspond to the subsections of the actions. And I think it would be really helpful if they did. For example, on the first page of the report, the third one across, or sort of the second one across, we've got 4 action points and there are 3 target dates. I don't know whether they refer to actions 1, 2, 3 or 4, and I think it would just be helpful to make sure that we get that right. Yeah. Which I don't need to answer on that. Okay. My first of the 2 questions was a very simple one. The Christchurch housing or the Dorset homelessness strategy at the moment, which is part of the Christchurch one, is 2015 to 2019. As the report says, we'll be looking at 2020, possibly going into 2021, but hopefully in 2020 to replace it with a unified strategy. Are we happy that the Christchurch one is still up to date enough that we can use it in up to the date that we replace it? And if the answer is yes, I just need a one-word answer for that one.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah.
Does that work? Can you? Is mine on? Yep, okay. Thank you. Firstly, I did want to come back on the action plan, so apologies, some of the dates don't quite translate to the action, so it's just that there's a lot in there, a lot of content, so thank you for that. We will align that. In terms of the Christchurch strategy, it is still valid and will be valid, but having said that, I think it's probably fair to say we are really in a period of transition. Quite a lot of our models and approaches that we've got in one area, we're rolling out to all 3. So what we've tried to present is in the report is kind of the position as at now, but it's probably fair to say it is quite a fluid position at the moment. And in terms of the new strategy, we've started to work up the plan for that already. And we're hopeful that we will probably present something after the summer next year. So we're really keen to progress that with really good input and consultation from lots of players around the table.
Thank you. My other question, and just say I'm very satisfied with that answer, thank you, is around the process, which paragraph 24 on page 26.
There is going to be some rationalisation. 3 heads of planning is not actually sustainable going forward, and many other positions like that. So, I think the report goes into a lot of detail about how we might do it. It is quite consultant speak heavy, but I suppose that's inevitable as it was a consultant document. So we've tried to interpret it into a report, and now the hard work actually begins for Julian's team to actually turning that into a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade. And I think you're completely right. Everyone knew this was coming. And as Julian pointed out to me earlier on, I can't be too mean because I think I was the one that signed off some of this. So you don't know me very well, do you now? Yes, only the good bits. No. So so I'll open it up to the board for questions. Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader. I've got 3 questions. Shall I ask them one at a time? They're all
testing my patience already. Should we do one at a time?
One at a time. First question is, KPMG won this contract. Presumably there were others. I don't need to know who the others are. What kind of sizzle or particular promise did KPMG give in winning this bit of business?
I'm afraid I actually can't answer that because I wasn't involved in the KPMG being selected. I'm quite happy for Julian to answer that if he knows the answer, but I came in one that had already been started.
Can I just clarify that the word you used was sizzle?
Deserves a better word. Was there any particular promise which kind of led to them being selected over others? Any particular unique value or something that they are going to commit to delivering to BCP that won them the competition?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't describe any of that whole day as sizzle. What I would say is, in awarding the contract for this piece of work, the primary concern of the individuals in the room, and there were a number of us, was actually whether or not we believed the people we were sitting and interviewing were aligned with us in terms of the culture and way of working. We were very clear that what we did not want to do was to award the contract to an organisation that was just going to come in and hand us something they had done somewhere else. KPMG were always very clear that through the process they would be facilitating our view of our future, and they would be providing capacity and capability to turn that view into something that could be quantifiably made real rather than just cutting and pasting from a different organisation. And what we got on the day was that perspective and relationship was more strongly aligned with KPMG than any of the other respondents.
Just on that, is it a standard time and materials contract, or is there anything key to results and benefits?
No, for this phase of the programme, which is the core design, it was a fixed cost.
Okay. That was actually part one and A and B, actually. I've got second question is, on the leader, on the location of teams, obviously this can get very sensitive, and I'm going to anticipate, without having endless facts behind me, that a particular pressure is going to come from managers at whatever level for themselves to be in one place and to have their teams close to them. And I'm going to anticipate that could be at odds with where those professionals need to be from a resident's point of view. I suppose my question is, how can you reassure that tendency, if it's there, that we are going to end up professionals in the right place logically across BCP for what's best for our residents, and that won't be compromised by people wishing to, in a quite muscular way, trying to centralise their teams?
That's an interesting concept. I think it's about which department, which types of people are where. For example, it would be slightly at odds to bring our people who are working in the waste environment out of a depot and into a HQ. Those depots might actually look to get bigger and more efficient, where we bring more community-based services into them rather than being at half a dozen different places. You might end up with 2 or 3 of those community spaces rather than 8. Equally, there's a really interesting piece of work that will be done around how we can make our libraries far better community hubs, and actually use spaces that are in some of our libraries to co-locate people who are working out of localities, how we can work with our partners like the NHS to work in their community hubs, or how they might want to co-locate into ours. So I think it's going to be around where those people should be. Clearly, the piece of work that's coming through the Cabinet Working Group is around where the central HQ, if you like, is, because we've obviously got 3 buildings. This is a fabulous, really well-teched building, but it's not got the capacity, I would have imagined, to fit everybody in. Maybe you might look to extend it. Maybe you might. I think we need to look carefully at where the corporate hub would be, and it's about looking at the 3 existing buildings and looking at other alternatives within the community of BCP for that. But the sort of people that would be looking to work out of a HQ will probably be the same sort of people that currently work out of a HQ rather than working out in the communities. But there are vast numbers of community hubs that we're using, and some of them may well be coming to the end of their life. It makes sense not to invest a lot of tech into a building that, perhaps is going to need a lot of physical investment, particularly as we move through the environmental programme as well. So you have a personal assurance for me that I don't want to see any muscling from the top down, because I consider that to be bullying, and that's not appropriate. It needs to be where the right people should be, where they need to be.
Thank you. Mr. Oscathorpe.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting question, which we're probably going to have to deal with at least twice. Once when we potentially decant people from buildings while other buildings are being prepared for the future state, and then again, as the leader has referenced, once we move into our final configuration. I think the point that I would make is that it's absolutely critical that we don't separate the issue of building and physical location from ways of working and access to services. A significant part of the investment that we're talking about is to make it possible, in fact, arguably preferable for us as officers to be able to respond to the requirements of our residents and customers at the right place, in the right time, in the right way for them. And so wherever I may be nominally allocated as a member of staff, that isn't where I'm going to sit all day and expect my customers to come to me. There will be a requirement, an expectation, culturally and in terms of performance, that we will move to the space which is more appropriate. And as the leader has already indicated, that may be in many cases more appropriate community buildings than we're capable of operating to now. Within now, I should say.
Thank you very much. Councillor Enger.
And the third one, I will keep short. The 4,000 suppliers, wonderful. Have a go at it. Fill your boots. That should have been a long time ago, etc. But anyway, but the one about the IT is intriguing. 390 and nearly 400 bits of kit or bits of system and so on. Look, from my own experience, big caution about this one. I'm going to ask you for an assurance on this one. These things are never a no-brainer, because 392 systems on the face of it may look monstrous, and the idea may look, solution may look scintillatingly simple. Let's unite around one. And the corporate world and the public sector world has seen horrible examples of attempts to do that. My earnest please, let's not be another statistic of that kind of thing. And my request is that this particular bit of it to do with systems, because it's such an enormous expense and it pervades everywhere. This almost comes for its own unique scrutiny as to what is intended in this particular area with IT systems. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that the NHS made a terrible mistake when they tried to replace their single IT system. And I don't think that there's any suggestion that we go from 392 to 1. I think that's completely reasonable. I mean, if I just take, social care are working across 3 different platforms. They need to be working under one platform. Which platform that is, and whether that platform also talks to what's going on in other departments, and where that sits within the network, is to be discussed. But the fact is, we have to move to a single one, because a social worker working, in BH18 and a social worker working in BH8 could next day be working out of BH23. So we need to make sure that they have a system that can work across that. But you're right, I think it does need very careful consideration, and it needs to be done by the experts. I don't know whereabouts in the process. This is the beginning of, this is the design outcomes to say this is an operating model we need to start moving forward with. This is now a 3 to 5 year programme which will have lots of pieces to it. And I suspect it will probably come to and fro the scrutiny and cabinet process several times during that. And I don't see any reason why different elements of it won't come at different times. I think it's far too big to be dealt with as a single issue.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the indicative benefits and the investment profile. And it shows that by year 4 we're looking at a benefit of about £30 million. My concern is because I understand that doesn't include the estate's investment that would be required. £30 million is not a lot. It's only half a new hotel. If you see what I mean. I'm very concerned, that our ambition for estates could actually remove a lot of that benefit, in fairly short shrift. And it does actually suggest in the report, the council hub design and build. That word build is worrying me already, knowing how much buildings cost. So a key question for everybody here, I think, is, what does that really mean? Are you seriously thinking about building a new town hall somewhere? But, it's just the cost of new buildings, etc., are huge. And so, of course, our IT projects, massively expensive, and this, particularly to accommodate some of the systems that we have in place.
Councillor Slade?
Yeah, the £30 million of the savings are for the transformation of the work. So it's actually how our council operates in future. The cost base of that council will be that much less. The build, there's a totally separate thing. And when I say build, that doesn't necessarily mean brand new building. It could mean anything, it's refurbishment, whatever. The capital costs around the building will need to be factored in separately, and there will need to be a capital programme to do with the build, because I think it would be this is unrealistic to bring those two together, two separate programmes. In order to maximise the transformation, obviously a consolidation of how we work in terms of the number of buildings would need to be taken part. Now, as far as your reference to, are we suggesting building a new town hall? I have my own ideas about what we should do and where we should go. It would be wrong of me to prejudge what the Cabinet Working Party comes up with. But I think in order to be fair to residents who are worried, councillors and staff who are worried, I think we have to look at the comparative costs of all of the options, so that when we do make a decision, that decision is made with the full information and with a full justification, so that 10 years down the line, people can't be saying, well, why didn't you think about X? So I don't want to prejudge it, and it's literally a 2 or 3 month programme, we think, to actually be able to explore that. We know that some work has already been done on that, but it hasn't been shared with us at the moment because we wanted to get this moving first rather than muddy the water. You had a second bit of your question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, IT. The IT costs are within this part of it.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Inevitably, the public, they're going to focus on this issue. They won't be interested about the way departments are saving money or whatever. It will all be about infrastructure changes. It's obvious to them, and that's one of the reasons I've raised, because it's clearly something that's going to have to be managed with sensitivity and good communication to make sure that the situation is understood as we move forward with it.
Let's just come back and say, I think that my reading of this, and I know that I've had several meetings with Ruth from KPMG around the numbers they've come up with, that they've been fairly pessimistic in sort of, they don't want to overpromise the potential of this. If you look at some of the case studies through the report about how much can be saved and how much has been saved by a lot of councils, it's spectacular. I think you're right, the public and the press will go, they're going to spend X number of £1 million to, tweak, to tweak their processes. I think the really important thing around this is actually the benefits and the costs. The benefits are realised pretty quickly. So actually within, the next sort of 3 to 5 years, anything we have spent will have been recovered. The building, totally separate issue, and I think we need to be really careful about how that's played. The last thing we want is a situation where people are saying, I can't get a council house and you've built a shiny new building. That's a really dangerous message, and that's why I think it's really important that we explore all the options and look at what are we trying to get out of the accommodation strategy rather than who wants a shiny new building. I talked to a council who built a new building. It saved them, I think, £20 million. But the building extension that they built, all the press wanted to talk about was what it actually cost. And they were so frustrated because they said, actually, the council's better off, the taxpayer's better off. But the press weren't interested in that bit. So I think we have to expect that. And I expect the public out there have been anticipating this since the announcement was made on the beach all those years ago.
Thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. It's just coming back to the actual operating model that is being proposed here. And in paragraph 20, I completely agree that do nothing was not an option, and so quite rightly so, it's been excluded. But perhaps Councillor Slade could explain how you arrived at just the one single model. What other options, if any, had actually been explored before you actually came to the conclusion that this is the model that would be proposed to go forward?
I think I'll start on that and then I'll pass over to Julian, because the input that we had in this was a 2-day collaboration project which involved dozens and dozens of senior managers in the Cabinet and KPMG looking at what those potential operating models might look like. It was quite an intense experience where they modelled different ideas. And I think what came out of those 2 days was a very clear driver from all three sides of that triangle that the only model that would actually save us the money and actually transform us was a digitally enabled single front door model. That was the bit that was overwhelmingly coming out, whether it was children's social work, whether it was environment people, whether it was corporate services, politicians, whoever it was all saying, actually, we've got to have this 21st century model. And the other ideas sort of fell away quite quickly. So that was the sort of the direction of travel that was very clear after sort of about 14 hours of being locked in the BIC without any windows, which was not the best part of the day, or 2 days. But as far as alternative specific operating models are concerned, I don't know whether Julian had a bit more input in the other models that were shown to you.
Okay, so to some extent this goes back to my response to Councillor Iyengar's question. So if we had perhaps selected one of those other potential bidders to do this piece of work, they would have sat us down and they would have presented 2 or 3 different potential models that have been successfully used in other organisations. As I said, that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to do 2 things. Firstly, we wanted to explore where the costs, duplication and inefficiencies were in the model we had following the safe landing on the 1st of April. And then the second bit, which was more the more aspirational bit, which was how would we, as a brand new 21st century local authority, choose to organise ourselves in order to respond more effectively to the needs of our residents and visitors. Now, if you look at the first of those things, and that's summed up in the high-level picture of the activity analysis outputs, it's quite clear that our current way of working is that we do every single role in every single one of our current directorates. And actually within each of those individual operating models, within each of the individual directorates, we're doing most things in 3.2 different ways because we're the sum product of the preceding authorities. So actually a more traditional view of an organisation that you might find in many other local authorities where you organise yourself and your operating model around strong professional vertical departments, we already knew that's how we were, and that's where a big part of our issues lay. So if you then jump forward into how would a modern 21st century organisation, local authority or private sector, respond to its customers, it's about if people are able and willing to serve themselves, how do you facilitate that? If they are either unable or unwilling to serve themselves, or if their needs are of such a complex nature that they need intensive face-to-face or other support, how do you get to that point as quickly and as effectively as possible? And that's where, as the leader says, you get into the construct that's expressed, the operating model that's expressed in the report. From there on in, you start applying the same principles, and the design principles are also in the report, and I would challenge anyone to argue with any of those design principles in terms of what we're trying to build for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And you get very quickly to this point that actually, if we're expecting our residents and customers to self-serve where possible, as officers, we should be more responsible, we should have better processes, we should be taking greater ownership and not expecting to have administrative support people doing many of our processes for us. We should be looking to exploit technology that's available to all of us in our consumer existences, online banking, Amazon, eBay, all of that stuff that we take for granted. We should have that all embedded in the operating model, removing as many of the workarounds and integrations that we currently spend a lot of time and money on. So I think where we got to was, if you look at where we are, if you look at where we wanted to be, there was no meaningful alternative way of organising ourselves. And actually, rather than create one and explore one and cost one and then build another business case for the sake of comparing, apples and apples, or oranges and oranges, it was just, no, we believe there is only one way to do this properly, and therefore all of our attention should be devoted to that.
Thank you. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. And Councillor said you're quite right that this has been on the public's mind since the photograph on the sand. And having done my fair share of evening meetings with residents, setting out the proposals of local government reorganisation, you always knew where you got to a certain point in the meeting where you'd answered everything that could reasonably be answered. When you got to the two questions, what's it going to be called and where's it going to be based? And everyone was quite pragmatic about let's start with call it what it is. And the way in which you said thank you and now it's time to go home was that's going to be a decision for the new authority in terms of where it needs to be based. But it is absolutely something which does focus residents' minds, and it will be a visual encapsulation really of what we're about. And I just had a couple of questions about the way in which we're going about getting to that whatever it is. And I just wanted to apologise, mostly because I can't read my own notes. Have you ruled out building something new and shiny?
My personal view is that I'm not sure that is the solution. But it is something for the working group to actually come up with. So I don't believe anything has been absolutely ruled out, because some people might say that's more efficient. But actually, what should we be looking at going forward? And I'm very happy to take questions on what's actually in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Be careful what you wish for is what I would say. But no, it's actually exactly one of the things that I was looking through when we were doing this. Many of us have been familiar with this from preceding authorities. I think many of us have found it actually very useful, particularly to get an early take on looming areas where things are starting to go slightly awry. And you're quite right, there's not a tremendous amount in here at the moment. Certainly for the purposes of the board today, I think the areas that we don't need to be looking at are the health and children's services. We have separate committees to look at that, so probably the best that we focus our efforts on the areas that are presented to us which we have oversight of, but B, exactly as the leader says, of areas which we may wish to request more information on earlier on. And I think the other good thing is that certainly from a scrutiny point of view, this is a very this type of thing is very good to get an idea of areas that do look to be slipping, where we may wish to do more further work through scrutiny to look at areas that are looming before us. The first of which I'll kick-start, seems to be planning, and it's probably not a surprise to many of us. We have seen it on the ground, but the figures do seem to be sliding for dealing with planning applications on time, and it's not a little slide. It seems to be going very sharply in the wrong direction. So I wonder whether the leader could take us through her thoughts around that.
Yes, so obviously we've got
So this is for items number 55, 56, 57 on the performance scorecard.
The major planning applications, it's turned itself around, they're coming back. It's the householder applications that are actually taking that bit longer, potentially. And really that is around a staffing shortage across the planning department, which we know, we recognise is there. And I think there's a lot of angst at the moment about filling those positions because of the problem is around the ability to pay the rates that the private companies are actually paying at the moment. So the planning department are looking at what their offer is, having to look at short-term contracts to be able to bring people in. And that's where, of course, this dovetails in with the pay and reward to make sure that we are actually paying the right market rate for people so we actually do get enough staff. Doing that while shrinking the budget is not an easy task. So there is a recognition around the planning applications are not doing as well as they should. And I have to say, I have asked the corporate director for an update today on, can you tell me why specifically this has gone down? And their view is that it's still okay. Yes, it's going in the wrong direction, but we need to keep a really close eye on it. And I agree, that's not an ideal solution. We've got to turn this around. But we're at 81%, which is a bit of a slide on last year. The forecast outrun is still to 85%, so that's where they're still expecting us to be. There is an anticipation that it is about the sort of peaks and troughs in the market. If they were predicting that was actually going to drop significantly, I'd be a bit more concerned. But there is an expectation that they're going to be hitting the 85%, which is higher than last year and only a tiny bit a bit below the national average. I think it's a timing thing, but I think it's really important that we flag that now and say, well, don't think you're going to get away with that because next quarter you're not going to have enough time to make it up.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I find myself a little bit out of my natural habitat, finding myself once again supporting Councillor Slade and agreeing with what she says. But there we go. It's just
it had to happen on one day.
At some stage, you had to. When looking at how you might improve and change the indicators, might I suggest that you do have a look at the old Bournemouth QPR report, because we spent a lot of time actually changing it to what we as politicians felt were important. And one I know you said not to go through them, but one obvious one for me is where the national indicator is the percentage of household waste recycled. I always wanted to look at the percentage that was diverted from landfill, because there are uses which are not just recycling. I think that's a really important one. I never got the what you were after, Will, though I did ask for it. The what happens to planning applications that go on too long, and the other thing section that I really think is missing is on transport. There again, where you haven't got national indicators, that doesn't stop a council having aspirations, particularly towards sustainable transport. And I would like to see a chunk on there.
You'll be pleased to know that in the email that I sent about this exact report, I said, I want to know, are we within target for TROs being done within the right amount of time, major roadworks being completed within the right amount of time, road traffic accidents, enforcement on trees. There's a whole lot of other things which the public care about. It's not just about what we care about. It's the things that fill up our email boxes of, why is that, how long it takes for a pothole to be filled in. Those things are really, really important to residents. And if we haven't got the ability to measure them, I don't really care whether there's a national benchmark for it. We need to set our own benchmarks for it. And I think what is probably fair to say is the corporate directors are beginning to see me say, look, come on, I don't really, you haven't got a national benchmark, fine. What's reasonable? What's not reasonable? One of the ones which is on children's services that I flagged is the percentage of referrals made within 24 hours. Well, okay, that's great. But what about the children that aren't within 24 hours? These are our corporate children. So what's the worst case scenario? And actually, I want to be seeing a lot more complex sort of where's the level 2 investigation into it. So I think it's fair to say that they're probably going to have to stop me having 100 of these, because I'm one for wanting to see the data and understand it, and drill down into it. I think it would be great to have an electronic version of this so that when I was working at the CCG, I could look on an hourly basis about, how things were moving up and down, and that allowed us to be able to respond to it a lot more quickly, but it also allowed all of us to be able to see the things that were happening that just didn't feel right. This is great, but it is a snapshot in time, and it's always after the event, so it's very easy for someone to say, this is where we were at the end of quarter 2, but it's all right, because we're halfway through quarter 3 now, and it's all sorted. That's not good enough. I think but this is a new process. Matty and Bridget and the team have done a really good job in getting us here. I've already started the process of when do we start setting for 2021, and I've asked all the portfolio holders to sit down in their one-to-ones with their corporate directors to talk about where they see this going. And as I say, I want to include, ask for your feedback, even though I might regret saying that.
No nonsense. And actually, it's something that I think we will look at as a board. I suppose the one caveat I would make is that the more that it can be integrated into the new model of working, the easier it can be, because there is a temptation, actually, local authorities often fall foul of this, of using an awful lot of resource to collate data, when that resource could have sometimes been used in much more useful ways as well. So there is a balance.
And I agree with you. I think that might be why it's limited at this point, because while we have 392 different IT systems, this probably takes a lot of work, and I'm probably going to be told, slow down a little bit.
And the more it becomes embedded in the system, the much easier it is. Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. The example you gave on the planning, the response that you got from planning, which was that the cases are taking this long, and it seems like the immediate response was, it's the resourcing. You've got to understand. I'm imagining if I was in the room there.
There, dear.
That is... that's a kind of recurrent theme. I've been in this place 4 years, and then even before then, it's the immediate link. It's almost literally a tennis match. The performance is this. It's the resources, you understand. And from those of us who've been on things like the police crime panel and so on, it's a well trodden conversation, isn't it? It's our resources, you understand, and it's because of a budget, which is often, of course, someone else's fault. The question is quite a simple one. Do you think in the conversations that you're having with corporate directors, let's say, and probably with service director level, it's getting a bit more insightful than that? Which is, do you think you're actually getting some proper sort of honesty, if I may? I'm not implying anyone's being dishonest, but a proper level of honesty and depth. Are you reassured that they are understanding their departments sufficiently to not be just batting it back and saying, it's resourcing, but they're understanding more of the inner workings of their own department? Because performance always can be improved, no matter what level of stuff you have, high or low, whatever. It can always be improved by simple creative thinking. Where do you think you are in terms of getting that honesty from them?
So I think this work sits really well alongside the base budget review programme that we've been doing, where myself and Graham and the finance portfolio holder and whoever the portfolio holder is for a particular department sit down with the portfolio holder and the corporate director and their relevant teams to actually really scrutinise how money is being spent. By doing that and actually exposing the detail around how different service levels are between the 3 former council areas, and where the money has historically gone. If you take planning, for example, what money is going in the processing of planning applications, what's going into enforcement, what's going into policy making. By actually going and scrutinising that over a sort of 2.5 hour period of really digging into this, it then means it's much more difficult to then give me a throwaway, it's resourcing, don't worry about it, it's all sorted. Because actually we can say, well, hang on a minute, we did talk about the fact that if you need more money here, this will generate some income. So we can have a much more joined up and sensible conversation around the piece. As I said, this is a snapshot in time and an opportunity for us to then send back the message to say, well, okay, so we said that you needed more resource there and you were prepared to sacrifice resource there. How's that impacted on this? And if they're saying, well, actually, we're in the process of recruiting this person or about to, get the head of planning in place, which means with the new restructure can happen, it allows us to back up the detailed conversation that we've been having. So I'm quite reassured that, bearing in mind a lot of the service directors have only been in their jobs for 6 months, and that we've only been doing this for 6 months, and that this is the first time we've really seen this document, this is an opportunity to then put those two pieces of work together.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? No, in which case we will certainly take you up on your offer. I think this is something which we can talk later when it comes to our forward planning, but maybe we have an ongoing piece of work on this through the board to talk about areas that we think would be usefully added to this section. So thank you very much.
Just to add a slight perspective, if you take the last two items together, both the organisational design and performance, and then look at budgets, I think that's where you will see the added value. So my recommendation for Overview Scrutiny would be to look at performance, but to also keep half an eye on the organisational design. So I think that's where we can see a more modern council really delivering higher quality services and doing it more efficiently for less cost, etc. And I think, my plea would be to members, try not to see it in isolation, because you put them together, you have a much more powerful picture. I think the potential for the organisation then is much stronger.
Thank you very much. Yep, taken on board. In which case, thank you, Councillor Slade, for your attendance this evening. So we will move to the final report, which, as standard, is our scrutiny of the finance-related cabinet reports for the 13th, which is a budget and performance monitoring report. Got a lot of reports there for the second quarter. Welcome to Councillor David Brown, and I'll leave it to you to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the Quarter 2 Budget Monitoring Report. Members of the ONS Board should recall a couple of months ago we had the Quarter 1 Budget Monitoring Report, so this is to update on changes since then. So the purpose of this report is to present the Council's performance against budget for the period 1st of April 2019 to the 30th of September 2019. In summary, the General Fund revenue projected outturn for 2019-20 financial year is a pressure within services net expenditure of £4.5 million. The most significant element of these is the £3 million pressure in the Children's Services Directorate, which includes a higher number of children in care cases inherited from Christchurch than was previously anticipated, a general increase in children in care numbers compared to the budget, and an increase in the numbers of special educational needs pupils entitled to school transport. So the position for this second quarter is an improvement of 0.5 million on the position as reported for the first quarter. The report emphasises that at this stage in the financial year, the forecast is just a projection and the deficit has not yet occurred. Positive management action can prevent the full level of this position from materialising. The report also sets out as appendices the reports from 4 corporate directors in respect of the background to the pressures in their service areas and the mitigation strategies that they've put in place to enable a balanced or better as a financial outturn to be achieved. The £4.5 million service pressure identified in the report will, though, not result in a deficit, as additional resources were allowed for within the overall budget approved by the BCP Shadow Authority in February 2019 to manage the greater than normal level of uncertainty in the first year of this new council. So the additional resources, as detailed in the report, are cited as a £2.5 million base budget contingency, which is designed to cover ongoing pressures not recognised or foreseen in service budgets, and a £6.5 million service-specific financial resilience earmarked reserve designed to enable the services to manage any one-off emerging issues as they strive to deliver the seamless transfer of services. So, Chair, the report also provides detailed and transparent information on the forecast use of the Council's earmarked reserves, its capital investment programme and its housing revenue accounts. So can I specifically highlight that the report requests Cabinet approval of a £653,000 scheme to deliver 3 new affordable housing units at Barrow Drive, with financing which includes £327,000 of prudential borrowing. And it also seeks Cabinet approval of an additional £357,000 expenditure on the development phase of the Our Museum Rediscovering Pool's Maritime Heritage project based on a further grant from the National Lottery. The report also requests Council approval of a £2.4 million Environmental Innovation Hub project at Durley Chine, funded by a grant from Coastal Communities Grant Fund. So, Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Straight off the back, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. You're talking about the 653k cost for the additional 3 houses on page 180. I'm just wondering if that cost includes any land costs, or is that just the cost of the build excluding land costs?
Councillor Brown? That's right. Yeah, it's within the Bournemouth. It's within the Bournemouth HRA, so it's HRA owned land. So my understanding is that £653,000 is the build costs on the HRA land.
That's what I thought. And in that case, I think it just seems a bit high. Sorry, but I think it's too high.
That's an interesting comment. I mean, I've having been around for a few years, it's often the comment actually with social housing developments. I've seen it in Poole before as well. When you look at the cost of construction costs, they do seem to come in fairly full. I think actually, I think it's in some ways it's good because it's a case that we build to quite a decent quality for social housing. I think I'm sure that budgeted figure would also include a contingency within that, so that may not be the final cost that's incurred.
The other sort of follow-on question from that is whether the development is being built within our own resources or whether it's going out to tender. And it's probably a bit too much detail for you to answer that question, I understand. But I'm sort of interested, because of the level of cost, would a project of this routinely go out for tender, or would it automatically go to a built within council resources?
A project like that will go out to tender, so yeah, there will be bids coming forward to sort of construct that. Councillor Bartlett, are you? Yeah.
Probably.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Haynes. Oh, Trent.
Unless someone else wants to go. Yeah.
Sorry, who?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay, I'm just being waved at. Councillor Haynes, you've got to make one up now.
No, I'm not. I have actually got some points to raise. It's just looking at the recommendation A. Says approves as set out in paragraphs 89 and 90. So I'm looking at paragraphs 89 and 90, and it's talking about asking for reports for the third quarter, but what we have in front of us is a report, or rather the snapshot as at the end of a quarter 2. But what I would also like to see is, unless you have already included it somewhere else, because the projected pressure within children's services hasn't moved, some of the others there has been movement, that I would like to see that the Director for Children's Services actually continues to provide a report. But more concerning is paragraph 90. It says Corporate Director for Adults sets that as part of the third quarter budget monitoring, details behind the 1.4 million projected deficit. So is that what you're expecting for quarter 3 within adult social care? And is that, it's just odd that it's actually here when we're actually looking at quarter 2. So just wondering whether you could provide a bit more detail as to what that is, and obviously, when we get to quarter 3, which we're not even there yet, but you are already projecting a deficit there.
Yeah, I mean, you picked up on obviously the sort of key proposed actions in paragraphs 89 and 90, requesting the Corporate Director of Resources and the Corporate Director for Adults to report back on those areas. I mean, those are areas that are identified now at the end of quarter 2 that we want them to come back at the next budget monitoring report, so that we've got their reports and their response to where they are now, what's causing those pressures, and what their actions to address those are. So that will come back in the next quarter. The point you made about children's services, obviously there's a report within, I think, Appendix D from the Director of Children's Services addressing what was identified at the end of quarter 1 and has changed slightly by the end of quarter 2, but in different areas. So she's reported back there on what's causing that and the actions that she's proposing. It's interesting that you say you'd like to hear back, I understand, from her as well, again, because that's a sort of, it's a continuing pressure area. There have been conversations between myself and Cabinet Member for Children's Services actually as well about whether we think that may be beneficial. So we're having that discussion about whether we had that. You might want to make that as a recommendation. I think actually probably as myself and the Cabinet Member for Children's Services are likely to accept that actually, and actually because it's a problem area and it's something we've been discussing ongoing, that actually we ask for a further update from the Director of Children's Services. So.
Chair, yes, I would actually very much like to have included as one of the recommendations, or from the board, is that we continue to receive an exception report from Director of Children's Services. Obviously, at this point, we don't know what the quarter 3 forecast will be. But I think the point I was making was that in paragraph 90, you're talking about a report from the Director of Adults for quarter 3, where you are predicting or forecasting a 1.4 million deficit. That was really what I was after. I wasn't after the fact that there is no report, because there is no deficit indicated.
Or participating in them as members, I think people have a lifestyle. I remember the difficulties I had years back taking time off for daytime meetings. It actually involved getting a sack and having a challenge and God knows what. When evening meetings were introduced, they were introduced for a reason. It was to involve more people and more members of the public in the meetings. And I do think that we need to seriously look at whatever structure we've got, whatever committees or whatever we've got in the future, that we should actually have, unless there are exceptional circumstances, a starting time of 7 p.m. for all evening meetings. I think that's the way forward, and I think that's the fairest on, most people.
Thank you very much. Your comments are noted. It is something that we will continue to have to deal with as a board if the agenda is as heavy as it has been. There are two very simple solutions. First of all, that fewer things come forward with Cabinet, and obviously there are lots of things to do, so that obviously is very difficult. The more equitable solution is if there is an ability for Cabinet to channel things to us earlier, rather than have a 4-day window in which case we have to look at things, and that will make the task for the Vice Chair and I much easier. But at the moment we are necessarily reactive, and I'm very mindful of the comments. I've had other comments as well that councillors with young children prefer to be during the day because evenings are useful time with parents. So that you are never going to win, but I do accept the principle that we do need to come up with a better solution. In the interim, as I mentioned earlier, we will look at the forward plan, the Cabinet forward plan for December's meeting. Come forward with a proposal. I think that's all we can do. I've got more. Okay. A few extra items that I'm being told that I have to. Sorry. Just a few things for members to note going forward. We will be having some training regarding finance scrutiny, so put in your diaries for the 4th of December. I will be sending out an email in due course, and we will be inviting all councillors to that. We've got the Centre for Public Scrutiny, who's very kindly agreed to come down again. This is going to be a very different, it's a new, much bigger council, so we have to make sure we get the finance scrutiny as right as possible. And also the Section 151 officer has agreed as well to give us a briefing on the budget in the second part of that day, so a morning and an afternoon session. That's not a formal overview and scrutiny board meeting, that is just training for those that are interested, and all members will be invited to that, and I'll be sending out an email of that in due course. As I mentioned earlier on, it seems now likely that the Cabinet date will be moving for December, so we will need to consider an appropriate date that we will have to have our overview and scrutiny meeting to be able to look within that limited time period at the papers that we have for that December meeting. And again, we will come forward with Chief Executive. Do we have an idea yet on?
We're looking at the 20th. I think is the date that we've talked about.
So we're looking at the 20th for the Cabinet meeting. So there will be mince pies, hopefully. So on the assumption that there are no clashes, we will be having to look. Probably there is a clash on the 6th. Yes. Yes. So we will. Well, this makes it very tough.
So we need to look at the date.
So we'd be very limited with evening meetings, is what we're saying. Okay. Well, we will have to come forward with proposals for that. We have 4 days in which to hold a meeting, and by the sounds of it, there's potentially evening meetings.
It's Friday the 20th, so we have the Wednesday and Thursday as well.
Okay. And I think that's it for this stage. Yes, if I could pass over to Lindsay.
Just to pick up on the comments around timing of meetings, I'm sure that the monitoring officer, if she was here, would want to just mention that the meeting calendar for 2020 is in construction with a view to going to council soon, and indeed those discussions do need to take place about the timing of meetings next year, taking account of the difficulties that we've been finding ourselves in as an ONS board with the level of business currently. So until those dates have been looked at for next year, we do remain in that situation where we have to look at the level of business monthly and figure the best way forward. But just to let you know that piece of work is in place.
Thank you very much. Without any further business, I wish to thank all members for a very full-on day, and I look forward to taking the recommendations to Cabinet on Wednesday. Thank you to Cabinet members, members of the public and board members. Have a very good evening.